Brain specialization is when particular regions of the brain are designated to perform unique functions. Brain lateralization is when a function is specifically occurring in one hemisphere of the brain. Although the left hemisphere and right hemisphere perform very differently from one another, it is not right to assume that exclusivity occurs here. The corpus callosum is a cable of 200 million nerve fibers that connect the right and left hemispheres of the brain to facilitate communication. This connection discourages exclusivity. However, every person has a slight hemispheric preference, but this does not mean they only use one half of their brain. The left hemisphere of the brain is the logical side. It keeps track of speech, words, sequences, time, and rationality. The right hemisphere of the brain is the more creative and emotional side. It is able to detect body language, tone, recognize faces, and do more visual math, such as geometry. Each hemisphere of the brain has a separate consciousness. In studies where epileptics had their corpus callosums cut to reduce seizures, patients were able to function normally, but under two personalities. Depending on which hemisphere they were working under, they would remember things differently and ultimately function under two separate consciousnesses. The arts help to encourage cognitive growth. Educating young children in music helps them to develop their motor skills, express themselves, and encourage rhythm and rhyming. The arts help children to benefit their perception of relationships, increase their attention to detail, realize that problems can have multiple solutions, be able to shift goals in process, make decisions when rules or guidelines are not present, use imagination, accept operating within certain boundaries, and see the world in different ways. It is important to integrate the arts into the curriculum in order to encourage these cognitive development skills. Studies have shown that students who largely participated in art classes, either through music or traditional art classes, had a significantly higher SAT score than those who did not. Studies have also shown that students who create music have much higher test scores than students who solely listen to music. Creating music has other benefits, like increasing understanding of math. Because math and music share similarities within patterns, counting, geometry, ratios, and sequences, students who create music are much more likely to understand math more deeply. Other studies have shown that students who participate in the arts have a much higher self-concept than those who do not. More research has shown that people who listen to music experience therapeutic benefits such as stress relief, pain minimization, and immune system boosting. Bloom's taxonomy describes a pyramid-like learning structure. Within this theoretical structure, the learner moves from the base to the peak, moving up in deeper knowledge for the topic. The base of the pyramid begins with remember. In the remember stage of learning, the student is able to recall rote facts and participate in semantic memory. The second stage is understand. The understand stage refers to the student's ability to make sense of the material and interpret a future outcome. The third stage is the apply stage. In the apply stage, the learner is able to use concepts such as rules, methods, and theories. The fourth stage is the analyze stage. The analyze stage occurs when the learner is able to break down the concept, see it for its parts, and examine the relationships of the parts. The fifth stage is the evaluate stage. In the evaluate stage, the student is able to determine whether or not they agree with the concept and examine the credibility or relevancy of the idea. The sixth and last stage is the create stage. The create stage alludes to the learner's ability to create a new story, theory, or plan based on the information they have learned. As the learner moves up the 6 stages of Bloom's revised taxonomy, they are increasing the complexity of the concept. However, if the learner moves across the stages, they are increasing in difficulty. For instance, if a student is asked to name 7 characters from a story as opposed to 3, they are still in the remember stage, regardless of how much effort is required to answer the question. Language is a complex ability of the human brain. Spoken language takes place in a few different regions of the brain. One region is known as Broca's area. This area helps a person to understand language, but not to speak it. A second region, known as Wernicke's area, helps a person to speak language fluently, but not to understand it. Learning a spoken language or two is simple for very young children. Unfortunately, learning a second language is not so easy for adults. Because babies are more able to respond to prosody, the cadence of someone's voice, they are more able to pick up on the phonemes of language. Phonemes are units of sound or syllables. The human voice can create 90 different phonemes. Eventually, these phonemes are combined to form words. In time, these words will have meaning to them in language. Finally, the understanding of grammar occurs. Children often pick up on the sequence of person, action, object, and catch on to proper grammar. However, some children experience language delay. Some children cannot speak real words until the age of 2. Although reading is expected from everybody in our culture, it is not a natural ability. There are many parts of the brain that have to be in sync at once in order to read. There is no one part of the brain that specializes in reading. Reading may be the most difficult task that the human brain is required to do. In order to read, your eyes must visually process the letters and form them into words. Next, the visual signals must travel to the visual cortex and the occipital cortex. Then, the word signals are decoded in the angular gyrus, where the words are broken down into phonemes. Afterwards, your language areas are activated and auditory processing occurs. The auditory processing sounds the word out in your head, and then Broca's area and Wernicke's area tells you what the sound means, and you are able to understand what the word says. In addition to the neurological aspects of reading words, one must also be able to be aware of phonemes, understand the alphabet and its sounds, have a vocabulary extensive enough to know what the word means, be fluent in speaking, and have text comprehension. Unfortunately, some children have greater difficulty than others in learning to read. Some linguistic causes that hinder reading are word blindness, differences in auditory and visual processing speeds, and brain lesions. Some non-linguistical causes are ADHD and sound frequency discrimination, to name a couple.